Morning.
Morning. Morning.
I want to thank Roy and Cole for giving me the opportunity to bring a message this morning. I appreciate that. And the dilemma always is, what to preach about. Not in a series. So I recently read a book called The Daniel Dilemma. And it was written by Chris Hodges. And the book is about the book of Daniel. And as I read it, it really opened my eyes on what's happening in our society today and how the book of Daniel really relates to that and how the book of Daniel can be applied to our lives. It's really a blueprint on how to live our lives according to God. Let me ask you this question. Do you think society is moving closer to God or further away from God? Pretty easy answer is further away from God. Shootings, bombings, abuse, sexual abuse in the churches, pornography. Pornography industry generates more revenue than CBS, ABC, NBC, NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. More revenue than all of those. Church attendance is plummeting. And just when you think you've heard it all the terrible things one human can do to another, you hear something that's unbelievable. And actually, I've heard this before, but just 3 weeks ago in Chicago, maybe you've heard of the young lady who was 9 months pregnant, answered an ad for Facebook for free baby clothes.
Yeah.
Actually, these 3 people, a woman and 2 men, actually were stalking her for a while, and she answered that ad, and the woman strangled her and cut her baby out. And then the baby, of course, was having problems, turned blue. They called the ambulance, and the woman said it was her baby. Well, things didn't go quite right because, it wasn't her baby. So they were arrested. The last I heard, the baby was surviving, but was in critical condition. So terrible things like that in our society. And all this bad stuff going on, it's cross-generational. It's not just the young generation, it's young to old. Do you know where the highest rates of STDs are? Sexual transmitted diseases? They're retirement communities. They're doing more than shuffleboard and bingo, right?
Oh, girly.
It's everywhere. The culture shift, you can feel it all around you, and you can think, oh, this is going on, there's no hope. There's just no hope, there's just too much going on, but remember this, there's always hope in Christ, because God's in control. The book of Daniel is the playbook to follow. The first 6 chapters are just what's happening to Daniel in those first 6 chapters can really relate to our society today. And you would think, okay, well, I'm going to do one of the famous stories in Daniel, like the lion's den or the fiery furnace or writing on the wall. I'm not going to do any of those. I'm starting at chapter 1, verse 1. But first of all, I'm going to give you a little background on Daniel. This was about 605 BC. After the reigns of King David and King Solomon, those were godly kings. They followed God's laws. But several generations after that, they stopped following God's laws. There were 12 tribes of Israel, 10 northern tribes and 2 southern tribes. And the 10 northern tribes, they completely disregarded God's laws. They were worshiping false idols. And God sent message after message for them to turn around. But they did not. So he allowed the Assyrians to conquer the 10 northern tribes. Now, there were 2 southern tribes, Judah, which Daniel belonged to, and Benjamin. And you would have thought those 2 southern tribes would have said, hey, look what happened to the 10 northern tribes. We better straighten up. But they did not. God sent his prophets Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. And still they did not turn around. So God allowed the Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, to go in and conquer and completely destroy Jerusalem. They took all the valuables back. But unlike most kings, or most evil kings at that time, he did not kill every man, woman, and child. He was different. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But Daniel was one of these prisoners that the Babylonians took back. And he was about 16 years of age at that point. So we're going to go ahead and start in Daniel chapter 1. It's going to verse 20, so it's a long. So in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, and he besieged it. He conquered it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put the treasure in the house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every type of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were entered into the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names to Daniel. He gave him Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. When the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of the Lord the king who has assigned you food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men in your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us enough vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 men, God gave knowledge and understanding, all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand the visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Wow, that was a lot. There's a lot in here. I really had to try to condense this down because I didn't want to leave anything out. It's so good. So verses 1 and 2, King Nebuchadnezzar came in during the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, and he besieged it. He conquered it. He completely destroyed Jerusalem, leveled it to the ground, took all the valuable treasures, but he took the people back with him. Like I said, he didn't kill them. Why didn't he kill him? He was brilliant. He was just brilliant in that aspect. Verse 3, the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility. This is where King Nebuchadnezzar was he was an evil king, but he was brilliant. Instead of killing them, he brought them back as slaves. Most of them, he would make work in the fields and the farms. But the other ones, he would, like of nobility of the royal family, some of the handsome young guys who are without physical defect. I guess they don't have any missing fingers or toes or big ears. I don't know. deep physical defect. They were really smart, not only handsome, but they were quick to understand and work well. So if King Nebuchadnezzar came here to Oak Grove and he went around, he wanted to pick all the handsome young men, you raise your hand. No, I'm kidding. They'd probably pick like Steve Barish over there, or Cole, Evan back there, you pick him. And even Mason, he looks like an Israelite. They could take all you guys back there, and then us old guys like me and Barry and everybody else, we'd be digging potatoes for the rest of our life. Yeah, they leave us behind, all right. So what they're going to do, they're going to teach them the language and the culture of the Babylonians. You know, they're taking 1 million people, and they're going to put them into their culture. In 3 years, they're going to have 1 million more Babylonians. Isn't that brilliant? Instead of, how long would it take them to have kids and them to grow up? So this is like, oh, this is an instant kingdom. You get 1 million more people in 3 years. So what they're going to do, they're going to brainwash these people. They're going to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. They're going to teach the Babylonian language, the culture, to everybody. Let me tell you this. The Babylonian culture was vile. It was vile. King Nebuchadnezzar, you can imagine him, he's probably this big fat king, and all he did was eat. But his soldiers were second to none. They were brilliant soldiers, but they were worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. They were just awful. They sacrificed babies in red-hot skillets. The first really empire to embrace false idols and gods. So what they're going to do, they're going to completely strip away what the Israelites knew about their culture, and they're going to be absorbed into the Babylonian culture and become Babylonians. Oh, we know you used to read the Bible and study about your God, but you're not going to do that anymore. You're going to put that book aside, and we're going to give you this little device here. We're going to give you this little device, and all day long you're just going to scroll through the Babylonia book and Nebuchadnezzar brand. That's Facebook and Instagram. So you're going to put that book aside, and you're going to do that all day. What that does is it takes the focus off of God, and you're focusing on everybody else instead of what you're supposed to be focusing on. Here's what else they're going to do. The king's going to assign them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. The king's table. They will be trained for 3 years, and after that they're going to work for the king. How do you get people to follow you? How do you get people to follow you? You feed them. You give them food and wine from the king's table. This was wine from the king's table, the best of the best, $1,000 a bottle. This wasn't some Boone's Farm or Mad Dog. And I know you people my age know what those are. This was food prepared by the best chefs of the day, like the Bobby Flays and the Gordon Ramsays. If anybody watched those cooking shows, you know, these people knew how to cook. But you know what they were doing when they were cooking? They were sacrificing the meat to the Babylonian gods. So any Israelite that still was following God, it was like a slap in the face, because they didn't eat food sacrificed to idols. And after 3 years of this great food and wine, pretty soon most of the Israelites, they completely forgot about their culture. They became Babylonians. They weren't going back to eating at Denny's and drinking Boone's Farm anymore. They were brainwashed, but not all of them. Think about this for a second. They trained them for 3 years. What happens to our kids after they graduate from high school? They go to college, don't they? Most colleges are secular colleges. They are told the Bible is worthless. You know, WVU, my son went to WVU, where couches burn and students learn, where alcohol flows and anything goes. I mean, that's the college culture. But you know, Jordan wasn't a saint, but he was grounded. You know, he was a designated driver. Many times he would be called in the middle of the night to drive his fraternity brothers home. And he was also a chaplain. So if, you know, I'm not anti-college, but if your kids are going to college, they have to be grounded, because that culture, that college culture, is different.
Yeah, amen.
Verses 6 and 7. The 4 men from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. What happened to these 4 godly men? They're seeing this culture change all around them. Oh my goodness. Some of their friends now are embracing the Babylonian culture. Slide 7.
Do you want me to go on to the next one? I'm sorry.
The question is this for you and for me. When culture shifts, and it is shifting, will you shift with it, or will you stand strong? This is happening in our culture today. If you want to stand strong, you have to understand what the enemy is using against us, what strategies are being used against us to change us slowly. The chief official gave new names to Daniel. The name Belshazzar to Daniel, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. Another tactic in brainwash is to strip the name that God gave you, strip your identity, and it's happening today. What's the big deal? I mean, they changed their name. What's the big deal? Let's go to slide 8. The name Daniel means God is my judge. The next slide, the Babylonians renamed him Belshazzar, which means lady protect the king. Lady, what? Lady protect the king? The first thing they do to Daniel is give him a girl's name. And then they change his gender. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar today? Men wanting to be women, women wanting to be men. What are you identifying as today? Don't listen to what God has told you, Daniel. Listen to us. Next slide. Look at Hananiah. Hananiah means Yahweh, which is a Jewish word for God. Yahweh has been gracious. They turn it into Shadrach. I am fearful of God. You can't trust God, Shadrach. God is against you. You should be fearful of God. Maybe that's what some of you believe, that you're fearful. You can't follow God's rules. There's too many. I can't keep them all. If I don't, God will be mad at me. No, God will forgive you. God forgives sin. Don't believe the lie that God is against you, because God is for you. Slide, the next slide. Look what I did to Mishael. His name means who is what God is. And what that means is nobody's like my God. My God is a mighty God. They changed it into Meshach. The next slide. Means I am despised and shameful before God. That's what they changed it to.
Wow.
Look at all the bad things I've done, all the sins. God can't love me. You feel this way? When you give your life to Christ, that shame is gone. You're free. You're a new creation. You want to stand up and shout, look what Jesus has done for me. You're not ashamed. Next slide is Azariah. Yahweh has helped. God helps in the good times and the bad. God is always by our side. Next slide, they changed his name to Abednego, which means servant of Nebo. It's a Babylonian god, a false god. People don't trust the true God, but immerse themselves in their careers, maybe making more money, drugs, pornography, any other false gods that they spend their time doing, but does nothing for true peace and happiness found through the love of Christ. Verse 8. Here comes a moment of truth for Daniel. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. The official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord, the king, has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Daniel resolved, he drew a line in the sand, not to defile himself. I'm not going to eat that delicious food and really good wine. No, I'm going to stand strong. Because he knows the food's been sacrificed to Babylonian gods. He's standing up to what he believes. He says, I don't care what name you give me. I don't care what kind of food you're trying to make me eat. The next slide. What happens next when you hold true to God's standards? Expect to be tested. The official says, he's essentially saying, are you crazy? If I do that, the king will have my head. And here's what Daniel says. Please test your servants for 10 days, giving us vegetables and water. Vegetables and water. Here we go. This is our new 10-day diet. Okay? There are diet books. There are diet books based on Daniel. There's probably a dozen of them there. The Daniel Plan, the Daniel Fast, the Daniel Cookbook. Next slide. I saw one up there, like, you can't see it real well, but the Daniel Diet Cookbook doesn't look like that's chicken on it. That's not vegetables. What are they trying to pull here? 1,000 ways to cook vegetables and 1 way to drink water. Right? Let's do it. How about we do an experiment for 10 days? Let's see. This half of the church, vegetables and water. Which side are you on, Barry? Vegetables and water? Vegetables and water. This side is steak and wine. You should have sat on this side. After 10 days, we'll see which side looks better. I know which side is going to be happier.
Heavier, probably.
So, once again, when you hold true to God's standards, expect to be tested. When you see the number 10 in Scriptures, it almost always means a test. God gave the Israelites what? How many commandments? 10. God was testing their hearts. When God was testing Pharaoh's heart, how many plagues? 10. When you trust God with your finances and your tithe, and you give a 10th, right?
Yep.
A 10th. Malachi 3:10 says, test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be enough room to store it. Now that doesn't mean you're going to get rich because you give God a 10th. But you will be blessed.
Amen.
When Daniel and his friends who do not defile themselves with this culture, when they live the way God has called them to live, verse 15, at the end of 10 days, they look healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So because they held steadfast to their godly beliefs. Verse 20, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them not better, he found them 10 times better. Next slide. When you follow God and do not give in to the culture around you, your life will not just be better. It will be 10 times. That doesn't mean 10 times richer. It's going to be 10 times better. And God tells you the test in this. The culture is shifting around us. We see it. We have to refuse to compromise. We have to refuse to go along. If If you're a Christian and have been compromising, you can start right now and refuse to compromise because you have the power of Christ within you. If you're not a Christian and you realize, I don't want to compromise. There are things in this world that I don't want to go along with. I can feel it, but I don't know how to do it. Something deep inside of me is telling me that. How do I fight it? Well, Jesus will fight the battle beside you. In fact, the war is won. Jesus on the cross, crucified, that conquered death, sin, and Satan. You can make that choice today and come down during the invitation to Him and give your life to Christ. Confess that you believe that Jesus is the Christ. Be baptized as Christian, as Scripture says. Let your old self go and become a new creation. Because everything you've ever done is forgiven. Everything. Our communion, or our invitation to Him is, He leads it to me. Verse 1. If you want to make that decision today, you can do it.